So I'm going to be using this purple Alcantara, which is a synthetic micro suede that they use in high-end cars. And I'm just using some spray adhesive to attach the Alcantara to this sew foam until I can get it sewn up. Just smoothing out the wrinkles with my hand. Then I can begin the very tedious process of laying out the diamonds with this piece of seamstress chalk. And I find that 2 to 1 is the good ratio for diamonds, so 2 units tall to 1 unit wide, whatever units of measurement you decide. Start running it through the sewing machine. I've got this Suzuki industrial walking foot sewing machine in my basement. And I'm actually running this video about 20 times speed, I think. I wish I could really sew it. Once I have that done, I'm just going to start in on this backrest. It's the smallest and arguably easiest part, and I can see how this is all going to look together. Before I start on the larger, more complex pieces, so I'm just using a seam ripper to unstitch the seat, because I'm going to use the old seat cover for a pattern. And I'm just fold the piece in half and mark the center. This is the front main piece. And I'm using a piece of the piping that I've ordered to make my seam allowance. And I just cut it out. And this is some perforated leather that I've had. I bought a long time ago from my Trans Am, and I never got used to the project. But it's getting used now. Then I just start sewing the piping onto the front piece. Start sewing the perforated leather along the side. This back flap. This weird horseshoe piece. Then I just stretch it over the pad, staple it in place. once again, I wish I could really work this fast. And I'll just bolt it on. And now I can turn my attention to the passenger seat. So I'm just gluing some of this perforated leather to the cell phone. And I'm going to deviate from the factory pattern. I'm using this paper plate because it has a radius that I like for this curve. Mark out the center of the seat. Pull all the staples out. Cut along my lines. And I like to cut my pattern in half. I only use half of the pattern because then I can flip it over and it makes everything more symmetrical. And you can see that I cut an extra piece for the same side. I worked 60 to 70 hours a week. I was pretty exhausted the whole time I was doing this project. So I make a lot of mistakes, but I just suck it up and drive on. So you just flip that over, and then your finished piece is more symmetrical than it would have been. And I'm just eyeballing the seam allowance for this skirt. Only used half of the pattern and then I just flipped it over, see? And I'm leaving it long on the bottom because I can always trim that off. And now just back to the basement and start stitching it all together. And when I start to sew the skirt onto this seat, I start in the middle of the back. Because the way the leather stretches, it'll end up not symmetrical. If I start at one end, it'll stretch as I sew it all the way around, and then the center of the back won't be on the center of the back, if that makes any sense. So when I do the other side, I just kind of do it a little bit at a time, like this. I don't know, maybe there's a better way, but this works for me. Then I go back up to the shop where I can stretch the seat. some contact cement, weldwood, and you got to have a pneumatic stapler. Like your normal Aero staple gun is not going to penetrate the plastic seat pan, but this is just like a staple gun from Harbor Freight, and it works just fine. Bolted in place, and we finally get to see kind of what it's going to look like. I think it looks pretty good. Now I start on the driver's seat, and I tried to use the same paper plate, and I decided the radius wasn't large enough, so I went and got a lid for a pan from my kitchen, and then I ended up just freehanding it. Cut it apart, make my pattern. Now I'm drawing this on the top of the perforated leather because I want the holes in the perforated leather to be straight in line with my pattern. I don't want them to look crooked when I sew the seat together. Then I go back to the basement and start stitching it all up. Start in the center again. Then I start sewing on my piping. Starting in the center. This is the only footage I have, but I actually went back and put a seam along this piping. Shop so I can stretch it. I did that same seam on the passenger seat, but I don't have footage. Just stretch it, cement it, staple it in place. And this took a long time. It's very tedious to do. I've trimmed it way down because I'm sure it's boring to watch. Had to stretch all the wrinkles out. Make sure it's symmetrical. You can very easily pull it off center. Lots and lots of staples. And there she is. And I think it turned out fantastic, if I do say so. It was a real challenge. I was really reaching on this one. Thank you so much for watching.